The distress band was never supposed to smell. Kethrail knew that was irrational. Vacuum carried no scent, and the observer deck of Relay Station Thrin 6 was filtered, sterile, and precise to the molecular level. Yet as the ancient waveform crawled across the hollow display, jagged, uneven, unmistakably crude, he experienced the phantom sensation of overheated insulation and burning dust. Primitive transmissions always did that to him. They felt fragile, mortal. The signal repeated every 12 seconds. Analog. No compression, no encryption, no routing header. Just desperation. He leaned closer, his crest fronds tightening as the station's acoustic translator rendered the waveform into sound. 3 short tones. 3 long. 3 short again. Each burst slightly distorted, as if the transmitter itself was failing. Origin, he asked. The station intelligence replied with its usual calm neutrality. Peripheral system designation, Pelith 3. Agricultural classification. Population, low technological development. Strategic value, minimal. The hollow expanded, showing a small green world beneath a dim orange star. Atmospheric loss indicators blinked amber. Magnetosphere integrity, declining. The message repeated. Planetary failure imminent. SOS. Planetary failure imminent. Kethrail's throat sac tightened. The transmission had been repeating for 22 hours. And until now, no one had answered. The Galactic Emergency Network processed the case in less than 3 seconds. Priority Index, 4.7, non-critical. Recommended action, monitor only. Projected resource cost for evacuation exceeded system economic value by a factor of 312. The Pelithai possessed no advanced industry, no rare elements, no strategic location. Their exports consisted primarily of methane grain and low-grade organics. Efficiently speaking, their extinction was regrettable, but acceptable. Kethrail authorized the standard automated sympathy transmission anyway. It was not required. He told himself it was simply thoroughness. The distress signal continued. Then a secondary alert chimed. Sharp, unexpected. External interception detected, the station AI reported. A new tag appeared beside the Pelith 3 signal. Recipient, Human Frontier Command. Kethrail froze. Humans were listed in council documentation as high-risk death world originators, a polite designation for a species with hazardous psychology, excessive risk tolerance, and a documented tendency toward emotionally driven operational decisions. Probability of response, he asked quietly. The AI paused longer than usual. Historical pattern suggests high. Kethrail felt that phantom smell again. 3 hours later, the long-range sensors lit up. At first it was only noise, drive wakes blooming at the edge of detection. Then the station resolved them into discrete signatures. 1, 3, 7, 14. Human vessels. Their trajectories were wrong. Not cautious insertion vectors, not energy-efficient curves. They were burning hard, accelerating past recommended stress limits, drive emissions flaring bright enough to overwhelm half the sensor array. Structural tolerance warnings appeared automatically. Crew survival projections dropped. They did not slow. Kethrail forwarded the data to the emergency council channel. The response came almost immediately, overlapping voices, alarm and disbelief rippling through the network. Authorization not requested. Resource expenditure unjustified. Target world holds no strategic. A pause. Then, from a senior analyst, quiet and unsettled. They aren't requesting authorization. Sensor estimates updated again. 23 human vessels now. More signatures emerging from jump space. Kethrail stared at the expanding cluster, at the reckless acceleration curves, at the ancient distress signal still repeating beneath it all. A new council message appeared, tagged urgent. Observer Kethrail, it read. Confirm, are the humans deploying a rescue fleet? He watched another drive flare ignite. Too bright, too fast, far beyond safety doctrine. Kethrail answered honestly. Yes. He hesitated, crest fronds flattening as the numbers climbed. And they are still accelerating. Across the council network, a single line of text began to spread, copied and forwarded faster than any official directive. Humans are mobilizing. For a world no one else had chosen to save. The first thing Admiral Elena Torres noticed was the silence. Not the mechanical quiet of a warship, There was always the distant thrum of drives, the whisper of air cycling through vents, the faint vibration of power moving through metal. No, this was a human silence. The kind that settled over a command deck when everyone was waiting for someone else to say the obvious. The Peleth 3 distress transmission scrolled across the main display again. SOS, planetary failure imminent. Commander Hale stood beside her, tablet in hand, hesitating just long enough to be respectful and not quite long enough to be comfortable. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "Galactic Emergency hasn't issued a response authorization." Torres didn't look away from the screen. The planetary telemetry was getting worse. Magnetosphere decay, radiation rise, atmospheric loss trending upward. "How long since the first transmission?" she asked. 26 hours. 26 hours. Someone down there had been shouting into the dark for more than a day. Hale cleared his throat. "Ma'am, do we have jurisdiction?" Torres finally turned. The bridge lights reflected off the viewport behind her, turning the stars into a faint halo around her shoulders. She wasn't angry. Not yet. Mostly she looked tired. "Commander," she said, "someone asked for help." He waited. "That's jurisdiction enough." The silence broke like a pressure seal. Hale nodded once, sharp and relieved, and began issuing orders before she'd even turned back to the display. Torres allowed herself one slow breath. Here we go again. 3 decks below, the atmosphere was anything but quiet. The briefing room had been designed for 40 people. There were at least 80 inside it now, with another 2 dozen crowding the doorway and hallway beyond. Engineers in grease-stained coveralls stood shoulder to shoulder with med techs, logistics specialists, shuttle pilots, and 2 civilian contractors who technically had no business being anywhere near a fleet deployment meeting. Commander Hale didn't bother asking why they were there. On the forward screen, the risk projections glowed in clinical red. Estimated mission survival probability, 38% radiation exposure risk, severe structural failure probability during sustained low orbit, high. Hale looked out at the crowd. "You've all seen the numbers," he said. "This is a volunteer operation. No one is being ordered into this deployment." A beat. No one moved. "All right," Hale said, trying again. "If you're not volunteering, this is your chance to step out." Still no movement. Someone in the back raised a hand. Hale pointed. "Yes." The speaker was a shuttle mechanic, barely out of her 20s. "Sir, is there a cap on volunteers?" Hale blinked. "A cap?" "Yeah," she said. "Because if there isn't, engineering's already overstaffed." Laughter rippled through the room. Tight, nervous, but real. Hale exhaled slowly. "We'll assign based on operational need." A line began forming at the waiver terminal before he finished the sentence. Kethrail stood at the edge of the hangar bay, trying very hard not to display stress coloration. Humans moved quickly when they had decided something. Not efficiently. Exactly. There was shouting, tools left in the wrong places, 2 people arguing loudly about fuel line tolerances, while a third simply climbed over them to keep working. But the motion had a direction, a momentum. Cargo pallets stamped medical surge slid across the deck. Portable shelters were being loaded into dropships. Someone had painted a crude message across one container in thick black marker. "Hang on. We're coming." Kethrail approached a cluster of crew gathered around a table where paper, actual paper, forms were stacked. "Risk waivers," one of the humans explained cheerfully when he noticed the alien's attention. "Radiation, structural failure, catastrophic decompression, the usual." Kethrail studied the sheet. It listed projected loss rates. Worst-case scenarios. A line acknowledging that survival was not guaranteed. The human signed without hesitation. One paused long enough to ask, "Do we get extra hazard pay for this one?" The officer at the table didn't look up. "No." Figured. Signature. Next. Kethrail recorded the moment in his observational log. No visible coercion. No command pressure. Participation rate. Approaching total. He added a second line after a moment. Emotional state. Determined. Not fearful. On the command deck, Torres watched new transponder codes appear on the tactical display. At first she assumed they were fleet elements joining late. Then she recognized the prefixes. "Civilian." "Who authorized that?" she asked. Hale checked his tablet. "No one, ma'am. They're independent registrations." A cluster of small ships resolved on the display. Long-haul freighters, orbital construction rigs, 2 hospital transports, and one ancient salvage tug that should not have been capable of interstellar flight anymore. A transmission request blinked. Torres opened the channel. The face that appeared was sunburned, middle-aged, and grinning. Frontier Command. This is civilian vessel Mercy Road. We heard the call. Torres kept her expression neutral. You understand the risk levels in that system? Ma'am, the pilot said. I've been running disaster relief since the Mars floods. If someone's broadcasting SOS, I'm already late. More civilian signals queued behind him. Torres muted the channel for a moment and rubbed her eyes. Of course they're coming. When she unmuted, her voice was steady. Civilian vessels, this is Fleet Command. Form up on the outer rally point and await coordination. And thank you. The man on the screen tipped an imaginary hat. Always answer the call, Admiral. The channel closed. Hale glanced at her. Maritime tradition? Torres nodded. Older than spaceflight, she said quietly. Older than engines. If someone sends a distress signal, you go. Doesn't matter who they are. Doesn't matter why they're there. She watched the civilian ships fall into formation with the fleet. You answer it, she finished. Always. 2 hours later, the updated system analysis arrived. Torres read it once. Then again. The Pelothai star's magnetic instability was accelerating. Solar activity projections had doubled. Atmospheric erosion was already measurable from orbit. Evacuation capacity calculations updated automatically, even with every fleet vessel, every civilian transport, every shuttle running nonstop. Maximum extraction estimate, 8.4% of planetary population. Torres leaned back slowly. Around her, the bridge had gone quiet again, but this time it wasn't hesitation. It was calculation. Crew members running numbers. Engineers already shifting power allocation models. Medical teams requesting revised triage frameworks. No one was asking whether they should turn back. 8%, she thought. So we save 8%. Her eyes moved to the civilian cluster again. Then to the engineering status reports. Then to the radiation tolerance limits. A different thought formed. Or we figure out how to make 8% wrong. Commander, she said. Hale looked up. Tell engineering I want options for planetary shielding augmentation. He blinked. Ma'am, that would require. I know what it would require. A beat. Then Hale nodded. Yes, Admiral. Torres looked out at the growing armada. Military gray hulls mixed with patched civilian plating, hospital ships gleaming white among them. They weren't a task force anymore. They were a response. Behind her, the Pelothai signal continued to repeat across the comm bands. SOS. Planetary failure imminent. Torres folded her hands behind her back. Hang on, she murmured. The fleet accelerated. And for the first time since the mission began, the projections stopped looking impossible. They just looked hard. The Galactic Resource Council did not meet in a room. It existed as a shared environment, an adaptive consensus space that reshaped itself to accommodate the sensory preferences of every species present. To the aquatic delegates, the chamber was deep and pressure-balanced. To the Silicon Matrix observers, it was a lattice of information geometry. To the Avian Hesh Collective, it was open sky and thermals of drifting data. To Keth Rail of the Thran, it resembled a quiet amphitheater carved from soft gray stone. At the center floated the subject of the session, a small green world, turning slowly beneath a thinning blue haze. Peloth 3. Around it, indicators pulsed in measured colors. Yellow for instability, orange for critical, red for irreversible. The session opened with procedural tone. Agenda Item 47.882. Announced the Council Facilitator, a neutral machine intelligence whose voice adjusted subtly for each listener. Emergency Resource Allocation Review. System Peloth. Distress classification confirmed. Intervention request, none formally submitted. External activity. Human frontier mobilization detected. The world rotated. Its magnetosphere flickered. Kethrail noticed that no one commented on the human activity yet. First came the numbers. Representative Ulven of the Vey Coalition spoke first, her presence appearing as a cluster of luminous strands that brightened when she transmitted. Population valuation analysis, she said. Total Pelothai census, approximately 3.2 billion. Technological level, pre-fusion industrial. Off-world capacity, negligible. Trade output, low-density agricultural methane compounds, non-critical. The data expanded into economic projections. Replacement value for lost exports, minimal. Supply impact to surrounding systems, less than 0.004%. A second voice followed immediately. Director Raz K of the Core Efficiency Union, represented by a dense geometric form that pulsed with precise intervals. Strategic alignment, none. Pelothai maintained no defense agreements, infrastructure partnerships, or transit corridors of significance. Loss does not destabilize regional security. The facilitator summarized. Economic priority, low. Strategic priority, negligible. The world turned. Red indicators spread slowly across its upper atmosphere. The council was not cold. It was optimized. Every species represented had endured catastrophe at some point in its history. Plagues, stellar flares, orbital collapses, resource wars. The early centuries of interstellar cooperation had been marked by chaotic rescue efforts, overlapping interventions, and, eventually, a brutal realization. There were always more disasters than resources. So the galaxy had built something better. The triage algorithms. They ran continuously across the emergency network, ingesting distress calls, environmental data, population metrics, and long-term stability models. Their purpose was not to save everyone. Their purpose was to save the most. A single high-density industrial world could supply medical components for 100 systems. A key transit hub could prevent cascading economic collapse across entire sectors. A technologically advanced species might one day solve problems that threaten thousands of others. Resources spent on low-impact targets were not just inefficient. They were harmful, because every rescue had an opportunity cost. Because somewhere else, someone more critical might die. It had taken 2 centuries and several painful failures for the Council to accept that logic fully. Since then, the galaxy had grown stable, predictable, survivable. Environmental assessment, said analyst group Sealan Prime, their voice emerging as layered harmonics. The star of Peleth filled the chamber. Magnetic field models unfolded in translucent layers, showing violent distortions spreading across its surface. Rapid magnetic collapse confirmed. Solar flare frequency increasing. Radiation output projected to exceed lethal thresholds for unshielded biological life within 41 standard hours. A new model appeared, the Pelothai homeworld. The magnetosphere weakened visibly, thinning, tearing, then collapsing entirely in the projection. Atmospheric loss accelerated. Surface radiation climbed into fatal ranges. Crude rescue operations, Sealan Prime continued, would require sustained low-orbit exposure within high radiation flux. Projected vessel failure probability exceeds 72%. Crew fatality risk, extreme. Kethrail felt his crest fronds tighten. The human fleet data hovered nearby, their trajectories bright and aggressive against the hazard models. They are entering the system regardless, he said quietly. For the first time, the chamber acknowledged the human presence. Debate opened. Representative Tellori of the Hesh Collective spoke first, wings of data rippling uneasily. Human intervention increases regional instability risk. Loss of a major human fleet element would have secondary strategic impact. Director Raz K responded immediately. Human operational decisions are outside Council control. Resource allocation policy remains unchanged. Ulvin's light strands dimmed slightly. There is also the matter of precedent. If inefficient rescues become normalized, triage compliance across member species may degrade. A smaller voice entered, Delegate Run of the Lethari, a species known for long-term cultural modeling. The Pelothai are sentient, Run said. Their extinction carries ethical weight beyond economic metrics. Raz K pulsed once. Ethical considerations are already integrated into valuation algorithms. Rin did not respond immediately. Kethrail watched the Pelothai world rotate, its upper atmosphere now glowing faintly in the radiation model. He transmitted before he could reconsider. Observer note, he said. The distress signal has been continuous for 31 hours. They are aware of their extinction timeline. A pause. Then the facilitator asked, relevance. Kethrail hesitated. Context, he said finally. Voting protocols initiated. Each representative transmitted an allocation index adjustment request. The facilitator aggregated them in real time, projecting the results as shifting probability bands around the planet. Options displayed. Full evacuation mobilization, resource cost, catastrophic partial evacuation support, resource cost. High remote aid only, resource cost. Minimal monitor and archive, resource cost, negligible. The probability field settled quickly. Full intervention, 0.2% support, partial support, 3.7% remote aid, 11.4% monitor and archive, 84.7%. The outcome was not surprising. The facilitator's tone remained neutral. Consensus achieved. Council action, monitor and archive. Cultural, biological, and environmental records will be preserved for historical continuity. A final line appeared beneath the Pelethi world. Extinction event, pending. Silence settled across the chamber. It was not indifference. It was acceptance. After a moment, Senior Counselor Merith, one of the longest-serving delegates, their presence represented by a slow, steady pulse of deep amber, transmitted a final remark for the record. The efficient outcome, Merith said, is to document extinction. The statement entered the archive. The session closed. As the consensus space began dissolving, Kethrael lingered. The Pelethi world remained for a moment longer, turning slowly, its atmosphere thinning one fraction at a time. Then another data layer appeared beside it. Human fleet projections. 23 vessels. Then 24. Civilian signatures mixed among them. Their survival probability field glowed a deep, unstable red. Kethrael accessed the Human Operational Doctrine Summary. One line stood out, marked as a cultural constant. Distress signals receive priority response regardless of strategic value. He hesitated, then added a private observation to the session record. Human intervention is not aligned with optimization models. He paused. However, projected behavior indicates they will not withdraw. Far away, the Pelethi signal continued to repeat into the dark, and the Deathworld fleet kept accelerating toward a system the galaxy had already decided to remember, but not to save. The first thing the fleet saw was the Aurora. It wrapped the Pelethi world in violent ribbons of green and white, beautiful at a distance and deadly up close. Radiation storms crawled across the atmosphere like living things, flaring and collapsing as the planet's failing magnetosphere struggled to hold shape. Sensor returns flooded the bridge of the flagship with warnings before the system even finished resolving. Admiral Elena Torres didn't need the alerts. She'd seen worlds in trouble before. Magnetosphere integrity? She asked. Down to 32% and falling. Hale replied, voice tight. Radiation flux in low orbit already exceeding projected limits by a factor of 2. Torres stared at the data. The atmospheric edge glowed faintly, where ionization was already stripping lighter gases away. Lightning storms crawled across entire continents. Orbital traffic was non-existent. They're earlier than the models predicted, she said. Yes, ma'am. Solar activity spike. We estimate full magnetosphere collapse in 40 hours. A new window opened automatically. Population, 3.2 billion total evacuation capacity, all fleet assets. 267 million revised survival projection, 8.1%. Torres felt the number land like weight. Start approach operations, she said. All ships radiation protocol Delta. Civilian vessels stay above high flux boundary until cleared. The fleet began to descend. Across the bridge, no one spoke about the number again. Elsewhere, across the network, the galaxy began to watch. Dozens of monitoring feeds opened as council observers and independent analysts tuned in. The human fleet appeared as bright signatures dropping toward a hazard zone most species would never enter with crewed vessels. Radiation thresholds marked in red were crossed one after another without hesitation. On Thrin Relay 6, Kethrael adjusted the gain on the live telemetry. Hull temperatures rising. Shielding loads spiking. Crew exposure counters ticking upward. They are entering lethal operational ranges, the station AI noted. Yes, Kethrael said quietly. The fleet did not slow. Low orbit over Peleth. 3 was chaos. Shuttles launched before the primary ships had fully stabilized. Dropships screamed through ionized air, their heat signatures trailing long scars across sensor feeds. Emergency broadcast channels lit up as human controllers flooded the spectrum with simple instructions translated into Pelethi chemical audio patterns. Shelter zones marked by beacon light. Remain calm. Evacuation rotations ongoing. Assistance incoming. On the surface, calm was a fragile concept. Pelothai population centers glowed with movement. Billions of methane breathers abandoning structures not designed for radiation shielding, crowding toward beacon points, their communication networks saturated with fear. In the Capitol Dome, Chief Coordinator RelTH watched the sky burn. At first, they had assumed the incoming signals were automated probes. No advanced civilization would send crew into a collapsing magnetosphere. Then the first human shuttle broke through the cloud layer. Then another, and another. RelTH activated the planetary broadcast channel, voice trembling through the translator matrix. External fleet, they transmitted. Clarify intent. Radiation levels exceed survivability thresholds. Your losses will be severe. The reply came from orbit, steady and immediate. Pelothai leadership, this is Human Fleet Command. We are initiating evacuation and surface support operations. RelTH hesitated. You cannot evacuate the full population, they said. Your resources are insufficient. Survival probability for planetary species remains low. There was a brief pause on the channel. Not long enough to be uncertainty, just long enough to be human. Then the response came. We don't measure rescue by percentage. On the flagship, Torres watched shuttle loss probabilities update in real time. One dropship reported shield degradation. Another requested emergency coolant venting. Medical teams reported the first cases of acute radiation exposure among flight crews. Keep rotations under 6 minutes surface time, she ordered. No hero runs. Hale glanced at the casualty projections climbing in the corner of his display. We're already past recommended crew exposure limits for sustained operations. Torres didn't look at him. I know. Around them, the tactical display filled with motion. Civilian transports were being assigned orbital holding patterns. Engineering vessels were deploying field generators at Lagrange points. Hospital ships began triage intake before the first full evacuation cycles were even complete. And still the number sat there. 8%. In the council monitoring chamber, the debate had gone silent. Instead, observers watched the operational feeds. Human crews running shuttles through radiation spikes that would have grounded automated systems. Ships maintaining station inside particle flux zones that degraded shielding faster than maintenance cycles could compensate. They are exceeding safe exposure doctrine, one analyst said. They are exceeding all doctrine, another replied. Kethrail didn't speak. He was watching a civilian freighter reroute power from cargo life support to external shielding, its crew exposure counters rising into long-term lethal ranges. No orders had been issued. They had done it anyway. On the surface, RelTH stood at the edge of a landing zone as a human transport settled onto scorched ground. Its hull was blackened, one engine cycling irregularly, but the ramp dropped immediately. Humans moved fast, carrying portable shielding panels, medical kits, portable atmosphere converters calibrated for methane environments. One of them looked up at RelTH and gave a sharp hand signal. Coordinator, the translator asked. Yes, RelTH said. We'll take whoever you've got ready, the human said. Next lift in 4 minutes. RelTH hesitated, glancing back at the crowd stretching beyond the horizon. There are too many, they said. The human followed their gaze. Yeah, he said quietly. There always are. Above them, the sky flashed white as another radiation surge hit the upper atmosphere. In orbit, the fleet's warning board lit up again. Solar flare probability spike. Magnetosphere stability falling faster than predicted. Revised collapse estimate, 32 hours. Torres read the update. Then she opened a fleet-wide channel. All units, this is Fleet Command. We are now operating under accelerated timeline. Increase shuttle cycles where exposure allows. Engineering, I want reinforcement options for planetary shielding on my board within the hour. She paused, looking at the surface feeds. Crowds moving toward lights, ships lifting through storms, civilian vessels edging closer to hazard limits despite standing orders. We're not here to do what's possible, she finished. We're here to change the numbers. The channel closed. On Peloth 3, the auroras grew brighter, and the clock began to run. The number would not move. Admiral Elena Torres stared at the projection hovering over her command table as if willpower alone might bend the math. Fleet capacity, shuttle turnover, civilian tonnage, radiation limits, medical throughput, every variable optimized, every assumption stretched. Projected survival, 8.6%. It had risen half a point. Half a point for 12 hours of continuous operations, and 3 crews already pulled for radiation sickness. Admiral, Hale said quietly, priority lists are coming in from Pelethi leadership. Torres didn't look up. Priority for what? Government continuity. Technical specialists. Infrastructure managers. They want to ensure species recovery if worst case happens. It was reasonable. It was logical. It was what the council would expect. Torres closed her eyes briefly. Put it on the main display. The list appeared. Layers of titles, clearance tiers, social roles translated into human equivalents. Leadership, engineers, agricultural coordinators, population genetic diversity matrices. The kind of list you built if you had already accepted most people were going to die. Torres looked at it for 3 seconds. Then she said, delete it. Hale blinked. Ma'am, no elite understandings. No continuity classes. She turned toward him. We don't get to decide who matters more. That's going to complicate loading efficiency. I know. A breath. Randomized selection, she said. Planet-wide lottery system. Weighted by location access and medical transport needs only. Broadcast the rules publicly. Hale hesitated. There will be backlash. There already is, Torres said. This way it's fair. She looked back at the survival number. If we're saving too few, she added quietly, the least we can do is save them honestly. Hale nodded once and began issuing orders. The number still didn't move. Engineering, Torres said into the command channel. Bring me your worst idea. The response came faster than expected. 2 hours later, the worst idea was on her board. Chief Engineer Malik stood at the center of the briefing hologram, looking like a man who knew he was about to ask for something unreasonable. The planet doesn't need evacuation, he said. Not all of it. Torres raised an eyebrow. Explain. The magnetosphere isn't gone yet. It's failing. If we reinforce it artificially, we slow atmospheric loss and cut radiation to survivable levels in sheltered zones. Hale leaned forward. With what field strength? Malik expanded the model. Everything we've got. The projection showed the fleet repositioning around the planet. Military ships, civilian rigs, industrial platforms. Each one projecting magnetic fields from its reactors and field generators. The individual bubbles linked, overlapping, stabilizing into a weak but continuous planetary envelope. Failure probabilities scrolled beside it. Reactor overload risk, high structural fatigue risk, extreme synchronization tolerance, minimal. Torres studied the model. How long could it hold? If nothing breaks? Malik said, long enough to buy time. And if something does break? He didn't answer. Torres nodded slowly. If we can't take them all off the planet, she said, we'll make the planet survivable. Malik's shoulders relaxed a fraction. Yes, ma'am. Start assembly. And Malik? Yes. Build in failure isolation. If one ship goes, the grid holds. Malik gave a tight smile. Already planning for that. Peleth, 3 changed shape over the next 12 hours. Evacuation beacons stopped marking priority zones and began flashing randomized selection codes. Public displays across the planet showed lottery results updating in real time, each selected district given a boarding window. At first there was confusion, then disbelief, then something stranger. Order. Pelethi crowd density maps stabilized as populations began moving according to schedule rather than panic. The knowledge that selection was random, no advantage for wealth, status, or location, reduced surges toward transport sites. Humans reinforced the message. Civilian communications ships flooded the atmosphere with repeating audio patterns, slow rhythmic tones designed to regulate breathing cycles in methane breathers. Visual beacons pulsed in synchronized waves, guiding movement like a planetary heartbeat. On one frequency, human voices broadcast simple translated phrases over and over. You are seen. You are not forgotten. Wait for your time. We will come. Somewhere along the way, someone added music. Kethrail detected it first as harmonic noise in the command frequencies. A soft, repetitive melody played continuously across wideband channels, layered beneath evacuation instructions. Purpose? He asked the monitoring AI. Human behavioral regulation technique, the system replied. Documented stress reduction response. He listened to it for several minutes. It did seem calming. In orbit, the cost was becoming visible. Human ships glowed along their spines as heat radiators extended to maximum. Several vessels vented coolant in shimmering clouds, the loss acceptable compared to reactor shutdown risk. Crew cycle reports showed exhaustion thresholds being exceeded across multiple ships. Medical teams began administering stimulant rotations normally reserved for combat emergencies. One civilian refinery vessel exceeded structural tolerance by 14% and remained in position anyway. Recommend withdrawal. A council analyst transmitted to the observation channel. The ship did not move. Kethrail noticed something else. No ships had failed yet. On the flagship, Torres watched the first segments of the artificial magnetosphere grid come online. Weak at first, fragmented, then stronger. Atmospheric ionization readings dropped by 2%, then 4%. She allowed herself one slow breath. Synchronization status? 73% of planned nodes active, Hale said. Full grid projection in 3 hours if no failures. If, Torres repeated. Across her display, the lottery numbers continued updating. Shuttle traffic surged in organized waves. Ground panic levels remained lower than any projection model had predicted. Fairness was slower, but fairness was stable. In the council network, something unusual happened. Several observers who had initially opened the human feeds for analytical review did not close them. Delegate Run of the Lethari transmitted a private query to Kethrail. Is the lottery confirmed? Yes, Kethrail replied. Selection appears statistically random. Even leadership? Yes. There was a long pause. Then Rin transmitted again. They are sacrificing recovery efficiency. Yes. Another pause. Why? Kethrail considered the question. On his display, a human shuttle lifted through a radiation flare, carrying a random cross-section of Pelathi. No titles, no identifiers, no priority tags. I believe, he said slowly, they are optimizing for something else. Around Pelath 3, the grid expanded. One ship at a time, one risk at a time. And for the first time since the operation began, the survival projection did something it had not done before. It began to climb. For 6 hours, it worked. The artificial magnetosphere grid stabilized into a fragile shell around Pelath 3, its strength uneven but measurable. Radiation levels dropped in sheltered zones. Atmospheric loss slowed. Evacuation cycles continued without interruption, guided by the planetary lottery that now updated every 3 minutes. On the flagship, the survival projection climbed past 12%. Not good, but no longer impossible. Grid integrity holding at 61%, Hale reported. We're seeing localized shielding peaks over high-density population centers. Torres nodded. Keep the industrial ships anchored to those nodes. If we lose coverage, we lose crowd stability. Below them, Pelathi cities had reorganized around the new protection zones. Shelter construction accelerated, guided by human engineering teams deploying prefabricated radiation barriers. The music broadcasts continued. Shuttle traffic ran like clockwork. For the first time since arrival, Torres allowed herself a dangerous thought. We might actually buy them time. Engineering pushed harder. Several ships increased reactor output beyond recommended limits to reinforce weak grid sectors. Civilian vessels volunteered additional power sharing. One aging cargo carrier rerouted life support redundancy to its field generator, accepting higher internal risk to stabilize a shelter zone below. The grid brightened. The models improved. And in the star's outer atmosphere, a magnetic knot slipped loose. The flare hit 9 minutes later. It began as a spike in the solar monitoring feeds, sharp, fast, outside the forecast envelope. Automated alerts cascaded across the fleet before anyone finished reading the first line. Solar event magnitude exceeding model limits, Hale said, voice already tight. Estimated arrival. The sensors saturated. Then the wave arrived. From orbit, Pelath's atmosphere erupted in white fire as charged particles slammed into the weakened magnetic shell. The artificial grid flared brilliantly for half a second, every ship dumping maximum output into the field. Then the first node failed. Civilian vessel Harbor Light reported reactor instability and went dark. A cascading overload followed through its linked synchronization cluster, tearing a hole in the grid across an entire hemisphere. The second failure came 30 seconds later. A fleet engineering ship held its output 3 seconds too long, buying time for a shelter evacuation below. Its reactor containment did not recover. On the flagship, alarms merged into a single continuous tone. Grid integrity down to 34%. Hale shouted. Radiation surge across all exposed zones. Torres gripped the command rail as the planetary display shifted from yellow back toward red. On the surface, the auroras turned violent. Shelter zones that had been stable for hours suddenly flooded with lethal radiation. Evacuation lines dissolved into chaotic movement as Pelothai populations abandoned compromised areas all at once. The music broadcast faltered when two communication relays tripped offline. For several minutes, there was no rhythm, only panic. The first misunderstanding came from the shelters. Human ground teams began pulling Pelothai away from entrances when radiation spikes exceeded survivable thresholds, sealing doors to protect those already inside. To the Pelothai outside, it looked like the rescuers had changed their minds, closing protection to save a chosen few. Crowd density surged. Order fractured. The second misunderstanding came from orbit. When several human ships vented coolant and began rotating to distribute heat damage, Pelothai surface observers interpreted the maneuver as withdrawal. Panic transmissions spread across local networks. The humans are leaving. They weren't. But the rumor moved faster than any correction. The third misunderstanding came from the Council. Monitoring feeds showed human vessels exceeding structural tolerance by dangerous margins while maintaining grid output. Analysts flagged the behavior as uncontrolled operational degradation, interpreting deliberate overload as loss of command discipline. Human fleet stability compromised, one report concluded. It wasn't, but the numbers looked like collapse. The fourth misunderstanding came from the humans themselves. Engineering had assumed the Pelothai population would remain distributed according to lottery scheduling. Instead, entire regions began migrating toward the strongest remaining shield zones after the flare, overwhelming transport capacity and blocking access routes. Fairness had created trust. Trust had created movement. Movement had broken the model. By the time the flare passed, the grid was half gone. 2 ships were confirmed destroyed. 6 more reported critical damage. Radiation exposure across multiple crews exceeded emergency medical thresholds, forcing entire teams into isolation. Survival projection dropped. 12%. 10. 9. On Thrin Relay 6, the Council session reopened without formal announcement. Revised mission viability estimate. 18 hours, Sealan Prime reported. After that point, crew degradation and structural loss will reduce operational capacity below sustainable levels. Director Ra-SK transmitted first. Human withdrawal should be advised. Continued losses now reduce long-term regional stability. Ulven added. Probability of full fleet failure now exceeds acceptable humanitarian return. No one spoke the obvious conclusion aloud. They were saving fewer lives the longer they stayed. Kethrail closed the session feed, then opened a direct channel to the human flagship. The bridge looked worse than before. Several stations were unmanned. The lighting had shifted to emergency efficiency levels. A medical team moved a crew member out on a stretcher behind the command area. Admiral Torres turned when the connection opened. Her face looked older. Observer Kethrail, she said. He transmitted the Council assessment directly, without diplomatic framing. Your losses are now strategically irrational, he said. Projected survival gains no longer offset fleet degradation. Continued operations reduce future human response capacity elsewhere. Torres listened without interrupting. Behind her, the planetary display flickered as another shield node failed. Kethrail added quietly, recommendation, withdrawal within 18 hours. There was a long pause. Torres looked back at the world, at the red zones spreading again, at the evacuation counters still climbing, slowly. Then she turned back to the channel. We passed rational hours ago, she said. The connection closed. On the Council feed, the survival projection dropped again. 8.7%. Almost exactly where they had started. The grid was dying by degrees. Each failure was small on its own. A ship throttling down to prevent core breach, a damaged node dropping out of synchronization, a cooling system locking into safety mode. But together they showed the same pattern. Coverage shrinking. Radiation rising. Time collapsing. On the flagship, the planetary display had become a map of loss. Green zones flickered yellow. then orange, then red. Evacuation traffic bottlenecked around the remaining shield clusters while entire regions went dark between shuttle rotations. Grid integrity 27%, Hale said. At current degradation rate, we lose functional coverage in 11 hours. Torres nodded once. And after that, atmospheric erosion accelerates. Surface exposure goes lethal outside hardened shelters. 8% survival would become less than 5. Behind them, another alarm chimed as a cruiser dropped out of the grid to prevent reactor overload. The shield above its sector dimmed instantly. Surface radiation spiked. On Paleth 3, 1 million people were suddenly exposed. Engineering broke into the command channel without request. Admiral, Chief Malik said, voice tight but controlled. We've got one more option. Torres didn't turn around. If this is another incremental reinforcement. It's not incremental. That made her turn. The projection that appeared over the command table replaced the fragmented grid with a single continuous field line wrapping the planet. Thicker, brighter, stable. How? Hale asked. Malik zoomed out. Every ship in orbit lit up at once. Not a distributed grid, Malik said. A synchronized discharge. We chain link every reactor, every field generator, every civilian industrial core into a single phase-locked output. One unified magnetic envelope. Torres stared at the model. How long? 40 to 60 minutes at full strength. Failure risk. Malik didn't hesitate. High probability of cascading overloads if phase tolerance slips. Worst case, multiple reactor losses. Worst case meant fleet destruction. Silence held the bridge. Then Torres asked the only question that mattered. What does it buy us? Malik brought up the surface timeline. With full-strength coverage, atmospheric loss stabilizes temporarily. Radiation drops to survivable levels everywhere. That gives us a 1-hour global window. Hale understood immediately. Mass evacuation cycles. And time to seal the underground shelters, Malik added. If they're closed under full shielding, they hold. Torres looked at the planet, then at the fleet status, then back at Malik. Can we synchronize civilian reactors? Malik nodded. We'll need voluntary compliance. And they'll be taking the same risk. Torres opened a fleet-wide channel. Her voice was calm. We're going to hold the whole sky, she said. The response came faster than any command. Civilian ships acknowledged first. A mining platform transmitted, tie us in. A hospital transport. We'll manage internal loads. Hold the line. The old salvage tug that shouldn't have been there at all sent a text burst instead of voice. Reactors older than me. Still works. Use it. Fleet vessels followed. No objections. No requests for reassignment. No inquiries about priority positioning. Crew status feeds updated automatically. Radiation exposure, elevated. Fatigue levels, critical in multiple departments. Withdrawal requests, none. One logistics officer quietly opened a secondary channel to civilian traffic. You understand this may overload your cores, she said. The reply came from 3 ships at once. We heard the call too. Synchronization began. Technically, the maneuver was brutal. Each reactor had to phase-match output frequency within fractions of a percent while routing power through field generators never designed for planetary-scale projection. Thermal loads climbed immediately. Radiator systems extended to maximum. Several ships began venting coolant continuously, leaving drifting clouds that glittered in Peleth's auroras. Phase alignment at 40%, Malik reported. Field coherence forming. Below, Shuttle Command began preparing for surge operations. Every available craft moved into position. Ground teams received the same message on repeat. Global window approaching. Maximum load cycles. Seal shelters on final rotation. On Paleth 3, the sky began to change. First the auroras dimmed. Then the radiation alarms slowed. Then, slowly, steadily, the upper atmosphere stopped glowing. Phase alignment 72%, Malik said. Sweat ran down his neck despite the cooled air. We're riding tolerance margins. One civilian freighter reported a coolant pump failure and stayed online anyway. A destroyer exceeded structural thermal limits by 12%. No one disconnected. Phase alignment 91%. The planetary display shifted. Red faded to orange. Orange to yellow. Then, for the first time since the crisis began, the entire world turned green. Full field achieved, Malik said quietly. The magnetosphere enveloped Paleth 3 like a second skin, stronger than its failing natural field, smooth and continuous across both hemispheres. In orbit, reactor load screamed. On the surface, evacuation traffic exploded into motion. Shuttles landed and lifted in overlapping waves. Shelter doors sealed continent by continent. Population counters surged upward faster than any projection model had allowed. Torres watched the time. 40 minutes. Then 32. Then 20. Thermal margins failing across multiple nodes, Hale said. We're losing tolerance. Hold it, Torres said. A cruiser reported internal fires in its power routing. A civilian refinery shut down half its internal systems to keep output stable. 17 minutes. On Peleth 3, the last open shelter doors closed. Surface seal confirmation coming in, Hale said, voice shaking now. Evacuation cycles finalizing. 10 minutes. Then Malik said, we're at the edge. Torres nodded once. Disengage synchronization. Controlled ramp down. One by one, the fleet disconnected. The artificial field weakened, but the shelters were sealed, the atmosphere stabilized, and the worst of the radiation surge had passed. Peleth 3 was no longer dying all at once. It was survivable. Across the galaxy, the sensors struggled to categorize what they had recorded. A fleet-scale power synchronization event. Planetary magnetic field generation. Atmospheric stabilization through distributed civilian and military reactors. No known doctrine supported the maneuver. No optimization model had predicted it. On Thrin Relay 6, Kethrail replayed the telemetry 3 times. He watched civilian ships exceeding safety limits without command authority. He watched military vessels hold output past failure thresholds. He watched the moment the entire fleet became, functionally, a single machine. Then he opened his observational log. Human fleet executed full reactor synchronization at catastrophic risk probability. He paused. On the feed, Peleth 3 turned slowly beneath a restored magnetic glow. They risked fleet-level loss. Another pause. He added the final line. They risk extinction-level loss for strangers. And for the first time since the crisis began, the survival projection rose faster than the casualty reports. When the last synchronization node powered down, the fleet did not cheer. Most of the ships were too busy staying alive. Across the formation, reactors ran hot long after load dropped, their cores bleeding off accumulated stress through emergency cooling cycles. Radiator wings glowed dull red against the dark. Several vessels drifted slightly out of alignment as damaged attitude systems struggled to compensate for warped structural members. Thermal stabilization ongoing, Hale reported quietly. We've got 3 ships in automatic shutdown, 2 more on manual core management. On the tactical display, some icons had changed color. 2 were gone entirely. Another 4 flickered with damage indicators severe enough that they would never leave dock again after this mission. Torres stood at the forward rail and watched Peleth 3. The artificial envelope had faded, but the atmosphere held. Surface radiation levels were still high, but no longer catastrophic. Underground shelter networks were sealed across every major population center. Orbital transports continued steady rotations, now moving medical supplies and long-term life support rather than emergency evacuees. Final survival estimate, 61.8%. Hale let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. We beat the model, he said. Torres nodded once. Behind them, a medical team escorted a shuttle crew onto the bridge for a brief systems consultation. Both pilots pale from radiation treatment, moving carefully but refusing rest until their ship was secured. No one clapped when the number crossed 62. Instead, someone in engineering quietly transmitted a fleet-wide message. Grid held. They're stable. Good work. One by one, acknowledgements came back. Not celebration, just relief. On the surface, Pelethi leadership waited until atmospheric loss rates had remained stable for 6 consecutive hours before transmitting their planetary broadcast. The signal went wideband, open to the entire emergency network. Chief Coordinator RelTH stood inside a reinforced shelter command center, the walls behind them covered in real-time survival charts and resource allocation maps. Their translator voice shook only once before stabilizing. To the Galactic Council, they began. Peleth 3 remains inhabited. Data followed the statement. Population survival counts, atmospheric stabilization curves, shelter integrity metrics, radiation survival projections. The numbers were verified automatically by independent monitoring systems. Then RelTH continued. You calculated that our extinction was efficient. You calculated that intervention would waste resources. You calculated correctly, according to your system. A pause. The next line was not translated immediately. When it was, the linguistic AI flagged the phrase as emotional emphasis. The Deathworlders did not come to save the valuable, RelTH said. Behind them, a camera feed showed shelter populations, millions of Pelathi alive inside reinforced caverns, temporary habitats, and human-designed radiation bunkers. They came to save the living. The transmission ended there. It spread across the network faster than any official communique. On Thrin Relay 6, Kethrail replayed the evacuation data instead of the speech. Lottery distribution records, population density equalization curves, shelter placement patterns. The human approach made more sense when viewed operationally rather than emotionally. Fair selection had reduced panic spikes, which reduced transport disruption. Mass shelter construction had lowered evacuation demand, which preserved fleet capacity. Civilian volunteer integration had expanded reactor availability, which enabled the planetary shield event. None of it had been efficient at the beginning, but together, the system had become resilient. He opened a comparative model and ran a council standard elite priority evacuation simulation using Peleth 3's data. Projected survival, 18 to 24%. He ran a strategic genetic preservation model. Projected survival, 9%. He ran the human method, 61.8%. Kethrail stared at the result for a long time. Then he added a note to his cultural analysis. Human decision frameworks prioritize social stability as a primary survival multiplier. In orbit, the human fleet began to withdraw. It did not look like a victory formation. Several ships required towing assistance from civilian heavy platforms. One destroyer remained in permanent low-power mode, its reactor deemed flight-capable but operationally unsafe. The salvage tug that had volunteered its aging core now drifted with half its systems offline, waiting for escort. Damage reports filled pages. Hull fatigue beyond service limits. Radiation exposure requiring long-term treatment for multiple crews. Reactor lifespans shortened by years. But when civilian ships peeled away from formation, many transmitted a final message toward the planet below. Stay alive. On the flagship, Torres signed the last withdrawal authorization. Then a council channel opened. The tone was formal. Admiral Elena Torres, Human Frontier Command. The facilitator began. The Galactic Resource Council acknowledges the successful preservation of Peleth, 3 population levels exceeding projected survivability thresholds. A data packet followed, commendation status, operational recognition, and a formal request. We request access to Human Distress Response Doctrine, volunteer mobilization frameworks, and emergency, civilian integration protocols for council review. Torres skimmed the request. They want the playbook, Hale said quietly. Torres nodded. Send it, she said. All of it. No redactions. The facilitator continued. The council also wishes to extend formal honors to Human Frontier Command for extraordinary humanitarian action. Torres paused. Then she opened a direct response channel. Council, she said, we appreciate the recognition, but we're not interested in honors. A slight delay, surprise in machine form. Clarify requested compensation. Torres looked once more at Peleth 3. Shelters holding. Atmosphere stable. Population alive. One condition, she said. Permanent protected status for Peleth 3 under council emergency priority. A longer pause. Justification? The facilitator asked. Torres shrugged slightly, though no one on the council could see the gesture's meaning. They've already used up their extinction allocation, she said. The council did not understand the humor, but the vote passed anyway. The first change did not look dramatic. It was a line added to an algorithm. Inside the Galactic Emergency Network, beneath the long-standing triage architecture that ranked crises by economic value, strategic importance, and projected system impact, a new review layer appeared. Secondary Evaluation Protocol. Human Model Intervention Feasibility. The parameter did not override efficiency calculations. It asked a different question. If resources were distributed broadly instead of selectively, if civilian integration were permitted, if risk tolerance were elevated within controlled volunteer limits. Would total survival increase? Most of the time, the answer was still no. But not always. Within 6 months, 3 low-priority worlds had their status elevated from monitor to limited response after human model analysis showed that distributed aid and shelter construction could stabilize populations long enough for recovery. The system remained efficient. It was no longer exclusively cold. On Thrin Relay 6, Kethrail watched the first such case unfold, a mining colony facing atmospheric contamination. Instead of waiting for a single evacuation fleet, mixed civilian contractors, medical transports, and local shipping vessels formed a coordinated response network. The operation ran slower than a standard council intervention, but more people lived. He recorded the result without commentary. The second change was less predictable. It came from the volunteers. Human-civilian networks had always operated informally, responding to disaster signals through professional associations, independent relief organizations, and what their documentation described simply as people who showed up. Other species had never considered such a system viable. Until Pelith 3. Within a year, 3-member civilizations authorized experimental risk pool registries, databases where private vessels, industrial platforms, and medical facilities could pre-consent to emergency deployment within defined hazard limits. Participation was initially low. Then a transport guild from the VE coalition enrolled its entire civilian fleet after calculating the insurance benefits of coordinated disaster response. A core industrial union followed, framing the program as infrastructure resilience rather than humanitarian action. The Hesh Collective resisted longest, then quietly created a volunteer glider corps for atmospheric rescue operations. The terminology remained clinical. The behavior did not. On Pelith 3, the changes were visible from orbit. The shelters built during the crisis had evolved into permanent infrastructure, deep cities reinforced against radiation spikes, atmospheric fluctuations, and long-term environmental instability. Human engineering designs had been modified for Pelithai physiology, then improved further by Pelithai architects. Above them, a small orbital platform maintained constant communication with the emergency network. Not a military installation, a signal station. Once per standard year, at the exact time the original distress call had first been transmitted, the platform broadcast a short message across wideband frequencies. SOS. Pelith 3. The signal lasted 12 seconds. Then it stopped. Within minutes, a human vessel, sometimes military, sometimes civilian, sometimes a ship that happened to be passing through the sector, would respond on open channel. Pelith 3. This is human traffic. Signal received. The exchange had no operational purpose. But Pelithai population stress indicators dropped measurably every time it happened. They called the day Signal Day. On the second anniversary, Kethrail attended remotely. He did not include the emotional data in his official report. Instead, he published something else. His cultural analysis circulated first among council research divisions, then across member networks. The title was clinical. Operational risk behavior in Deathworld origin species. The conclusion was not. Previous council classification of humans as high-risk decision-makers due to poor loss optimization is incomplete. He included the Pelith survival curves, the volunteer participation models, the crowd stability metrics under fairness-based selection. Then he wrote the line that would be quoted far beyond academic channels. Humans are not reckless. They are catastrophe specialists driven by empathy under extreme threat. Their operational strength lies in stabilizing social systems when conventional optimization predicts collapse. The classification index for humanity changed 3 months later. From high-risk death world originators to high-risk/high-stability crisis responders. The designation did not reduce their risk rating. It added something else. Trust. Not all changes were positive. Insurance markets struggled to adapt to voluntary high-risk deployments. Several mixed species rescue coalitions experienced early failures due to cultural differences in acceptable loss. One core-led intervention collapsed when volunteer thresholds were interpreted as mandatory participation, causing mass withdrawal and legal disputes. Efficiency and empathy did not integrate cleanly, but the attempts continued. On the flagship Resolute Horizon, now fully repaired but carrying structural reinforcements that would permanently reduce its maximum speed, Admiral Torres declined 3 separate requests to serve on council advisory panels. Instead, she authorized a new fleet program, distributed response training, civilian integration track. Enrollment exceeded capacity within weeks. 2 years after Peleth 3, the Council convened a strategic review session. The consensus chamber formed around a familiar model. A small green world. Atmosphere stable. Population recovering. Infrastructure rebuilding faster than projected. Peleth 3's economic value had increased slightly. Its strategic value remained minimal. Its cultural impact index was now listed as high. Senior Counselor Merith transmitted the final summary. Efficiency doctrine remains operationally optimal for large-scale resource stability, they said. No one disagreed. But recent events demonstrate that efficiency models underrepresent social resilience effects under distributed risk acceptance. The chamber remained quiet. Then Merith added a final statement for the record. Efficiency preserves systems. A pause. Humans preserve hope. The Pelethi world rotated slowly beneath them, its surface lights spreading farther each year. And the galaxy, Merith concluded, may require both. Far away, in a quiet sector, a small signal station prepared for its next annual broadcast. Across the network, hundreds of ships, human and otherwise, maintained automated filters for a simple pattern. Free short, free long, free short. Because the new protocol did not change the old truth. Somewhere, someday, another world would send that signal. And now, more than one species was listening.